So today we're going to look at the Kabbalah. And we're going to look at the Kabbalah, this mystical Kabbalah, to see how this system may be used even if you have little or no experience. There are many books and texts that you can read on the subject, but they all get a little complicated, so the purpose of this video is to try and simplify it so that you can get started working with it immediately. I'll be covering all the fundamental concepts, and I'll be simplifying your shopping list so that you can easily find all the resources that you need. So with that, let's begin. Okay, so let's kick this whole thing off with an overview of what we're going to cover in this video. And we'll start with the 10 Sephiroth. And the Sephiroth are the spheres of emanation that exist on the Tree of Life. Then we'll move into the 4 Kabbalistic worlds. And yes, there are 4 Kabbalistic worlds, 4 worlds of existence. Before moving on to that important subject, attributes and correspondences of each of the Sephira and how they apply to the 4 worlds. And then I've got a special little subject on incense, and the reason I concentrated here on incense a bit is because when you buy some of these textbooks, you'll find that some of the incense that they recommend is highly obscure. But I've put together, I've done the work for you, I've simplified this, and I've found alternatives, if not exactly the same thing under a different name, that can be readily purchased. Then we're going to round off the whole discussion with the purpose for each of the Sephira and the magical uses for each of the Sephira, and why you would choose one particular Sephira for a certain purpose. And then rounding off the whole discussion, we'll have a ritual example. And with that, I will lay out a template that will show you how to start the ritual and complete the ritual. So let's move on to our first point of example, our first topic of discussion, the Sephira. Now, the Sephira, and Sephira is a singular of Sephiroth. As an aside, the Sephira are or may be seen as individual emanations, a certain point of creation. And if we look at the Tree of Life, we can see that there are 10 Sephira emanations, 10 levels of emanations on the Tree of Life. And now if we start at the bottom and look at the Sephira of Malkut, that is the Sephira that represents the material, the physical world, the world that you and I all know. And as we rise further and further up the tree, the Sephira become more and more abstract in concept until we get to the top 3 Sephira. And at the top 3 Sephira, we're in the world of what one may consider to be pure spirituality. It's above any physical manifestation at this point, and the highest of the Sephira is Keter, and Keter is the first light, the beginnings, and pure spirituality. So, simply put, the Tree of Life may be seen as a a diagrammatic representation of the entire process of creation, starting from the most highest level of spirituality and gaining more and more substance through its emanations down to the point at Malkuth where we're into the actual physical world, physical manifestation. But this tree, this plan of creation, doesn't just exist in one context as a universal plan of existence and that's it. This tree, this idea of creation is present in everything. For instance, philosophically, this concept may be seen in every human being or even every living creature. From the first inklings of an idea, that idea is manifest to an actual implementation and a physical result. And so what is above is below. That process of creation is modelled right throughout everything within the universe. In terms of working with the Kabbalah, though, there are 4 worlds, 4 macro worlds, if you like, that incorporate everything else, and those are the 4 worlds that we are interested in. And these 4 worlds are Atzilut, the highest level of abstraction, the world of the archetype. And then the next level is the world of creation, Bariah. And moving down, we move into Yetzirah, the world of formation, and finally down to Azaya, the world of the material. And these worlds may also be seen to correlate to the worlds of the spiritual, the intellectual, the emotional, and the material. But it's the world of Bariah that we're interested in. This is the world of creation, and hence this is the world where all the work is done. So the question is now, how do we work with the Kabbalah? So each of the Sephira has associated with it certain attributes and correspondences. So the most obvious attribute that's associated with the Sephira that we can see on the tree here is the planet. But there are 7 planets, and we have 10 Sephira, and only 6 of the planets are represented on the tree. So what about the other 4 Sephira? Well, the sun and the moon make up 2 of the remaining 4. And then if we look at the tree, at the very top we have Chokmah, which is associated with the universe. And it's associated with the universe because if we look at the tree as a model of creation, then Chokmah is the Sephira responsible for formation. And Keter, well, there's no planets associated with Keter, as Keter is the Sephira of pure spirituality, and there is no work conducted on Keter. In fact, as a rule, there's no work done on any of the top 3 spheres of the tree. Now, these top 3 spheres are known as the Supernals, and they represent a level of abstraction that is above the material. Now, if you want to know more about the Supernals, then I did a little video about that a while ago, and I'll post a link to it up there, and I'll drop a link to it in the description down below. So we have the planets, or celestial objects that are associated with each of the Sephira, but what else is associated with the Sephira? Well, there are the names of the gods, or from the Hebrew perspective, various names of the one God. But if you come into it from a different perspective other than the Jewish faith, then the names are pretty easy. As you can see, the planets have been assigned to each of the Sephira. And these planets, of course, are the names of the Roman gods. And in this case, the Romans did a good job for us, because there's one thing about the Romans, is that when they came across gods from other cultures, what they did was to associate those other gods with their own gods. And so we ended up with, well, from the Celtic perspective, gods like Apollo Granus and Mars Cassidius and Sulis Minerva. And it's very easy to then see how these gods were seen from the Roman perspective. And so to correlate each of the gods with the appropriate Sephira. And so, on the tree so far, we have represented as correspondences and attributes the planets themselves and the names of the gods. And we also have the elements, earth, air, fire, and water. There are also fragrances, plants, animals, magical images, sigils, music, and there's a whole host of correspondences that are associated with each Sephira. And to help you with that, I've created a video for each of the Sephira that are meant to be used as an aid when working with the particular Sephira. And I'll post a link to the playlist up there and down in the description down below. So each of these Sephira has correspondences. So what is it that we actually do with these correspondences? Well, the idea is, if you wish to work with a certain Sephira, then you should immerse yourself in the essence of that Sephira. And you do this by surrounding yourself with all the symbology that's associated with that Sephira, such as the fragrances, the colours, the magical image, and even the music is important. And the theory is that by surrounding yourself with all this symbology, is that it puts you into a cohesive union with that particular Sephira, and the right frame of mind to be able to conduct work which is in the domain of this Sephira. So how do we know which Sephira to use for our particular purpose? Well, the answer to that can oftentimes be seen just by looking at the correspondences of the Sephira. But then there are tables of intentions. Unfortunately, most books on Kabbalah are lacking these tables of intentions, but there are a couple I know of, and we'll get to those a little later. But for now, I've put together this slide which breaks it down so that you can quite easily choose the Sephira you need for your particular purpose. So let's take a look at this slide and some of the magical usages. And first up, we have Chesed. And Chesed is represented by the planet Jupiter. And Chesed is all about expansion and growth. So you may want to use Chesed for things like expanding a business, or you may want to use it for improving your leadership skills. But it's also associated with rule, law, and ethics. So next up we have Geburah, and Geburah is represented by that red planet Mars. And Mars is known as the god of war. So this is about conflict or conflict resolution. And it's about passion and vengeance. control over battles and anger, and dealing with one's enemies. Now, next up we have Tipareth, and Tipareth is represented by the sun, and it's associated with money, success, friendship, and health. Now, Netzach, next on our list, is represented by the planet Venus. And as we all know, Venus is associated with love and art. And so Netzach may be used for working with those more softer, emotional pursuits. So next up we have Hod Mercury, the intellectual. And Mercury's about learning, literature, communications, crafts. And he's also one of the gods of the arts. So he's perhaps the more intellectual god of the arts. And lastly on our list we have Yesod. And Yesod is represented by the moon. And the moon is all about emotion and mood and mystery. And it's about clairvoyance and divination. And so these are the areas in which you would work with Yesod. So let's now talk about some of the books that I recommend. And the first one, I don't actually have it in physical format. I've only got it on the Kindle version. But this book is called Practical Kabbalah Magick, and it's by David Rankin and Sarita Dieste. And I hope I've pronounced her name correctly. If I haven't, well, sorry, Sarita. It's the Dieste I have a problem with. Anyhow, in this book, on page 173, and this is the reason why I like this book, or one of the reasons I like this book, is that it has a good list of intentions. And so, as I mentioned before, it seems pretty thin on the ground that these books actually mention which Sephiroth to use for which purposes. Now, this book has a good section. It goes on for about 2 or 3 pages. So that's the first book. So the next book I recommend is this one. And this is Kabbalah for the Modern World by Magin Gonzalez Whippler. And I've had this book a long time, as you can see. It's very well used. The thing I like about this book, and about this author, in fact, is that she does get to the point. She doesn't hold anything back. Like there were times, especially in the earlier days, where people would just broach around the subject and not actually give you any useful, practical information. Well, she always gets to the point, and this book is full of tables. Well, it's falling apart. I've actually purchased another copy of this on Kindle because, I mean, I like this book so much. And it also gives me the ability to, apart from having an electronic copy, it gives me the ability to search through and find exactly what I want when I want it. And maybe my hard copy will last a bit longer. I should stop doing that right now because I want to keep this book. And I recommend anything by this author. I have a number of her books and I find them all to be very good. Now then, also, again, tables of intent. I have it marked here if it doesn't fall apart on me. What page is this? Page 188. And she has here a table 11, and it's called the Sephiroth and Work on the Tree. And it gives you the purposes for each of the Sephiroth, pretty much what I've given you in that slide. So there you can see it there. I'd suggest if you're going to get one book on the Kabbalah, a concise book that covers everything from the philosophy even to the actual practical usage of the Kabbalah, this is the book I would get. Now, the last book I would recommend is not actually specifically about the Kabbalah. It's this one, and it's called Planetary Magick. Let's get a good camera angle. Okay, Planetary Magick by Denin and Phillips. And this book will give you all the correspondences, because as I said, it's not specifically the Kabbalah. It's about planetary magic. The correspondences and associations are the same. And it's a very thorough and concise book. In fact, let's have a quick look at something in here. So we have sigils, and we have, let's have a look again. Thumbs out of the way. Sigils and names of the various gods, and it gives the Celtic gods as well as all sorts, Greek, Indian, the divine names, names of power. So, and again, it's split into chapters for each of the planets. And so as a reference, I don't think you're going to beat this. And it's even got some rights. Again, Denin and Phillips do some very good books. So, another one I highly recommend. Oops, probably not in focus. There you go. So before we move on, I just want to talk a little bit about incense and the incense that we use. And the problem with these books is that they tend to use the older names. And some of these fragrances are almost impossible to get. So I've done a lot of research to find equivalents, and they're not substitutes. They are equivalents, modern day equivalents that are easy to find. So let's look at this list now. First up, we have Chesed, and with Chesed, it's easy enough. Cedar, we can get that. For Geburah, it's suggested tobacco. Now, I don't like the smell of tobacco. And so my substitute was nag champa, or I've been using a lot of Egyptian musk. And that works very well. Now, Tipareth, Olibanum. Now, Olibanum is actually frankincense. So we can purchase that online quite easily. And if we move down to Netzach, it's rose, simple enough. Hod, now this one was more complex. Hod is a storax. Well, I have no idea what storax is, or until I started looking into it. It took me a long time to find an equivalent, but storax, I found out, is also another thing, styrax, which I still couldn't manage to procure. But styrax, in turn, is also known as benzoin. So we're able to get that particular fragrance, again, easy enough online. Yesod, jasmine, very easy to get. So those should help you when you're looking through your correspondences, and for instance you need olibanum or storax. Well, now you know the equivalents that you can purchase easily enough. So now that we understand about the Sephira and the correspondences, the question now is, how do we work with them? Now, everybody has their own way of creating ritual. So what I'll do is to provide a base template that you can take and modify for yourself. But at least it's something that you won't find in these books, but it will get you started. So you can split this down into two sections, really. There's the planning, and then there's the actual implementation of the ritual. So I think in terms of planning, the most important thing is intent. You must know your intention. And I would suggest that you write this down clearly and concisely. Now that we understand our intentions and we understand clearly what we want to achieve, it's time to start looking at which Sephira we need to work with. And of course we do that by looking at our table of intentions and choosing the appropriate Sephira that matches those intentions. Next we look at the correspondences for that Sephira, and we choose the correspondences from the Queen scale, or from the Kabbalistic world of Bariah, the world of creation. Now there's a lot of correspondences, but you don't have to use them all. You just choose the ones that you think are most suitable for the task that you have in mind. Now there are a few that I think are perhaps maybe more important than others, such as incense. I think is quite important. The sense of smell is quite a powerful sense. And so I would suggest having some incense for this Sephira available. And then there's the magical image itself. And imagery and symbology, again, is very important. And so the colours, the various colours for that particular Sephira is again extremely important. So in short, I'd say symbology, incense and the colours are the most important correspondences you should focus on. Now, some people may want to add food and drink to go along with their ritual, and then there are others that think that the planetary timings are important. And if they are important to you, then you should use them. For me, I don't consider those so essential. Me personally, I'm a believer in simplicity, and the simpler the ritual, then the more potent I believe it can be. If you start overcomplicating the ritual, then you can lose track of exactly what you're trying to accomplish, and keeping a focus on your intentions is of utmost importance. Now you may have a full-blown altar that you want to use with all the paraphernalia, or you may just have a table, or you can even just use the floor. But there are a few things I'd recommend that you have whether you're using an altar or not, and that is a candle to represent fire, a cup to represent water, incense to represent air, and what was the last one? Yes, a pentacle to represent earth. Now, a pentacle is just a pentagram within a circle, and you could just draw one if you don't have one, or better still, if you have one carved out of a disc of wood, that makes a perfect pentacle. And they are. You can buy those pentacles made out of wood quite easily on various online stores. So that's the planning of the ritual done. We've got all our resources and we know exactly what it is that we wish to accomplish. So now let's move on to the actual ritual itself. And we start off with the consecration and creating sacred space. And all this really means is to create an area that you feel is free of any negative energy. Basically, it's just a clean space for you to work within. And it may be as simple as just casting a circle on the ground, and some people, they'll point to the ground and they'll walk around clockwise to create the circle, and they will cast this circle 3 times, and that is enough for them to have created sacred space. Others might feel that they need to get a bit more sophisticated, and they would use something like the LBRP, the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram. And I can't go into that in this video, but there are many places where you can find instructions to conduct the LBRP. I myself have my own personal way of creating sacred space, and that is in accordance with my own Celtic belief systems. And I think it's important that you adapt these rituals to make them more meaningful to yourself. Don't let anybody tell you there's a right way and a wrong way to do these things. The best way is the way that means something to you. So now that you have your sacred space, it's time now to immerse yourself in that Sephira and bring yourself in an alignment with that Sephira. And you can do this by focusing on the correspondences that you've assembled, and to start in a meditation on those correspondences and on the Sephira and what it represents. And you do this until you feel aligned to this Sephira. Now, I like to think of it as a frequency, and that different stages of consciousness vibrate at different levels. And I see this as matching your frequency with that of the Sephira. Now, one thing that's very useful in helping to attain this level and matching this frequency of the Sephira is the use of music, which I forgot to mention in the planning stage, but music can be extremely powerful in helping you to get to the same level. And those resources I spoke about earlier on, I did one for each of the Sephira. They all have the appropriate music. So I think if you've managed to get this far and have got yourself aligned with the Sephira and feeling comfortable and immersed in all that Sephira represents, I think you've come a long way. Now, at this point, some people may find the need to invite various spirits and deities into their sacred space to help with protection and guidance with the work that they're trying to accomplish. And now is the time to do that. So we have all our spirits and our guardians and deities in attendance, and we are psychologically, consciously and subconsciously tuned to the Sephira in question. We can now begin to focus on our purpose and our intention for being. So this is now the point where you make your appeal. Now, earlier on in the planning stage, you wrote down your intentions. So you should now vocalize these intentions. And you may think of this as planting the seed of your intentions into the fabric of the Sephiroth, so that you can nurture it and flourish it and make it grow into a reality. So now the seed is planted, we now need to nourish it, and we do that by feeding it with our own energies and power. And this may be accomplished by keeping a strong focus on your intention and using visualizations. You could also use other methods such as chanting or the beating of drums. So the idea here is to build as much energy and power as you could possibly muster while still keeping that vision of your intent firmly in mind. And you'll continue to do this until you feel you can't go any further. This is as much energy as you can muster, and you have reached a peak. And it's at this point that you will ground this energy and release it into the Sephira. Now, for me, grounding is achieved by bringing things back down through into the Sephira that represents the physical world, and that is the Sephira of Malkut. And of course, Malkut's element is earth, and the symbol that I suggested that you have, the pentacle, is the symbol that represents earth. So just as you're reaching the peak of your power, you may ground this power by visualizing your intent becoming a reality as you reach out to the sphere of Malkut and see this intention manifest into an outcome as you reach out and touch the pentacle, knowing that your work has been done. But we're not finished yet. Now we have to finish the ritual, and that means that any spirits or deities that we have invited into the ritual to help us, we now have to give license to depart. And then we have to close the circle. So how you do that, again, is a matter of personal preference. You may want to walk around the circle, thanking each of the spirits or deities for attending your ritual, and be very courteous in telling them that the work has now been done, and they may leave if they choose to do so. And if you started this ritual with the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, well, now's the time to repeat that process to cleanse the area. If, on the other hand, you just cast a circle, well, now's the time to close that circle. And you do this by pointing to the floor and visualizing the circle dissipating as you traverse the circle in an anti-clockwise direction. So as I say, this is just a template to get you started. Now, each person should develop and devise their own particular personal method. And the more of your own personality and personal beliefs that you put into this ritual, then the more effective this ritual is going to be. So I hope that you'll all find this guide useful. And if you do, then don't forget to give us a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, then please consider doing so. And with that, I'll see you again very soon on the next one.